Hi, it's Tom Jordan. So nice to have you here back on the program. And I really, really want to talk about this today because, to me, in my view and my perspective, this has been one of the dumbest cases I have ever seen. And is so obviously a weaponization of the judicial system in this country. So I'm talking about the Stormy Daniels hush money case. Donald Trump convicted of 34 felonies, so everybody can call him now a convicted felon. So the sentencing's happening in a few days. And after Donald Trump had filed this motion to put a stay on that sentencing, to halt it, his January 10th sentencing date in this New York case involving alleged falsification of business records, claiming the charges are politically motivated, which they clearly are. I mean, an objective view of this shows that is the case. In any case, the case violates constitutional principles. It reflects this broader misuse of the justice system for political purposes, all of that. So Donald Trump says, listen, I'm about to be inaugurated president of the United States. So he files this motion to stay the sentencing for it. And Judge Juan Merchan, who hates Donald Trump, denied, obviously, Trump's request for the stay, leaving the sentencing for January the 10th, just 10 days before Donald Trump's inauguration as the 47th president of the United States. And while the sentence is an unconditional discharge, which means there are going to be no penalties. Like, Donald Trump is not going to jail. He's not going to be fined. He's going to be discharged. There's nothing he has to, there's no recompense for what they call these very serious crimes. So why is he doing this? Well, it's the timing, right? It just reeks of political theater if you break it down. So if you're not totally familiar, you kind of forget the background of this case. Here it is. Donald Trump was convicted in May of falsifying business records tied to a $130,000 payment to Stormy Daniels. Now, most people call what he paid her in her agreement a non-disclosure agreement, an NDA. It is common practice, happens all the time. Very common practice. It's not illegal unless you are the most hated politician this side of the Revolutionary War. I don't think anybody's been more hated than Donald Trump, and that is why they brought this case in the first place, and they've convicted him. You got a corrupt prosecutor, Alvin Bragg, and in my view, a very corrupt judge in Juan Merchan. So the payment, they say, was meant to influence the 2016 election by silencing Stormy Daniels about an alleged affair. Now, Donald Trump's defense, he denies all of the allegations. He calls the trial a politically motivated attack aimed at disrupting his presidency. And when you look at all the comments from people involved in this case who went against him, their main goal was to keep Donald Trump out of the Oval Office, that he would never again become president of the United States. We've seen that effort manifest itself in many different ways over the past several years, including when he was president, all the efforts to get him out of office through false claims and accusations and turning people against him and saying he was a spy of Russia, blah, blah, blah. Go down the list. So his spokesman, Donald Trump's, pointed to the case as part of a broader pattern of weaponized legal actions against political opponents, something that we've seen all the time in other countries, but now has become common practice in this here country when it involves Donald Trump. So we're going to dive into this in a bit with Matthew Schneider, former federal prosecutor, former U.S. attorney under President Donald Trump, and now a partner at Hahnemann dealing with white-collar crime. That's just a few seconds away. A great interview with Matthew Schneider. He knows his stuff, and he's a very objective, was a federal prosecutor, now working for an attorney with Hahnemann. Also, just want to remind you right now to chime in. You can comment. You can ask questions. I'll be taking those in just a bit. Just put them in the comment section of wherever you're watching right now. If it's YouTube, X, Facebook, I'll get to those in just a moment. Also, a reminder, the best way you can help Tom Jordan Live, simply subscribe to the podcast. Click the notification bell. Share the content. Get the word out. It just helps us tremendously, and we really appreciate that. From the bottom of my heart, I just say thank you so much. It's free to subscribe. Just subscribe, share the content. Thank you. Okay, back to this. The motion to stay the sentencing was denied by Judge Juan Merchan. Trump team, his whole team believes this whole case was built on very weak foundation. So Trump was convicted, as I mentioned, 34 counts of falsifying business records tied to a hush money payment to Stormy Daniels. But his team, many legal experts say, they pointed out this is all these glaring holes in this case, in the prosecution case. It's not about justice. It's about using the courts to drag down a political rival through baseless allegations. So just a reminder of what happened here. So the falsifying business records, it was all based on the fact that when Donald Trump's team paid his attorney, the attorney puts out $130,000. It's got to be paid back by, it was a legal expense. This happens all the time. So then Donald Trump's team writes legal fees to pay his attorney in this case. They say that was falsifying business records, and those are felonies. This has never been done before. When you pay somebody, they tried to do it, and we'll get into this with Matthew Schneider. They tried to do it years back with John Edwards. He was a Democratic candidate for president. They tried to claim he did the same thing. That case was just nonsense. He wasn't convicted. It's never been done, but somehow this case, they brought up in a state court a federal law that even the feds would not prosecute because they say this is not what you're claiming it seems to be. There is no case here. So Alvin Bragg twists the law and somehow is allowed to bring a federal law into a state court, and the state judge complies the whole way. All right, so I spoke with Matthew Schneider. He's the former federal prosecutor, former U.S. attorney for the Southeastern District of Michigan under President Donald Trump and under William Barr. Here's our conversation just a few moments ago. Matthew Schneider, he's a former federal prosecutor and the former U.S. attorney under President Donald Trump, and now a partner at Hahnemann dealing with white-collar crime. Matthew, so good to have you on the program. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Oh, thanks, Tom. It's great to be back with you. I'm happy to see you've got this great show and
Yeah.
you got a growing audience, and that's fantastic, and it's well
Th-
deserved.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's a real joy to do this because we can speak freely and I think objectively about a lot of issues that Americans are curious about, and this being one of them. And we've talked about this case for quite some time, with Alvin Bragg and Judge Juan Merchan, and what the basics and the legitimacy in regards to so-called evidence of this case was all about. And now we have the latest here is that Judge Merchan denies Donald Trump's request to delay the sentencing, which is going to take place now in just a few days on January 10th. Donald Trump wanted to put a stay on that, and Juan Merchan says, nope, denied, absolutely. So the hearing for this is just 10 days before the presidential inauguration for Donald Trump as president. Does the timing to you seem suspicious in any sense, especially in the light of the fact that Donald Trump is going to probably be sentenced to anything? Like there won't be any consequences for what they were deeming were very serious offenses.
So it's a great question. In a criminal sentence, hundreds of people are sentenced for activities that took place during a trial. And then over the course of a month in America, this happens to thousands of people. In this particular case, these questions are so unique because it is Donald Trump. Just the question of how do you do this? Do you do this on a video proceeding or do you do it in person? Where does it take place? Is it always in that particular courtroom? When does it take place? That's your question, Tom, about, is it before the inauguration or is it after the inauguration? And then really the big question is, should we even be doing this at all? Like, why are we here? That's a huge question that Donald Trump has, and I think a lot of other people do have as well. So to get to the gravamen of your question, in the normal course of proceedings, in a normal proceeding, if you request an adjournment of your sentence, you usually get it. I mean, the judges are often very accommodating. Not so in this case, right? This judge is determined to have this prior to inauguration day. And I think that's because this judge wants this conviction on the books. He wants that to happen. I think that's what is in the judge's mind.
So if the sentencing is going to come with no punishment, which is likely going to be the case here, no punishment for this whatsoever, what's the real motive behind having this sentencing in the first place, do you think?
So there's really kind of pros and cons if you look at it from Trump's perspective. The con is the judge's motivation to get this sentencing on the books means your conviction is final. So, yeah, he's been convicted by a jury, but under the eyes of the law, a jury conviction isn't really finalized until after the sentencing and after you issue what's called a judgment and committal order, and the judge puts that order in the books, and then it's finalized. So the judge wants that to happen. In Trump's perspective, he could want that to happen too, because you can't appeal a sentence until after it takes place.
Mm,
So he's got a pro and con here. Like, on one hand, he might think, well, I want to delay this because I don't want this conviction to be finalized. Then I can always say I was never convicted under the law. On the other hand, he might say, well, let's get this over with because then I'm going to appeal and I'm going to win. So
mm.
he's got a couple different options there.
Does he have an appeal? A strong case, do you think?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, there's a variety of different reasons for that. He's got the supremacy clause, of course. There were evidentiary problems in this trial. Stormy Daniels testified. She really didn't need to testify. There were a lot of issues that took place. There were a lot of objections that were overruled. There's certainly a lot of appellate grounds. There's also some grounds that Trump raised that aren't his strongest arguments. For example, he's saying that this shouldn't go forward because of the Transition of Power Act, the Presidential Transition Act. Well, that act really relates to money and supplying money to the transition authority. So that's really not his best argument. But he does have these other arguments about the supremacy clause and the infirmities that took place during the trial that he'll likely raise. He certainly will raise those, and those might carry some water moving forward.
You mentioned the evidentiary problems within this case. There were 34 counts, felony counts, of falsifying business records tied to these payments from 2016 to, as you mentioned, Stormy Daniels. In my world, and I think in your world as well, when you see these kind of payments go out, they're known as non-disclosure agreements. Typically, they're calling it hush money to keep her, quiet during a campaign season. But when you look at the falsifying business records that Donald Trump paid his attorney, reimbursing his attorney, who made the initial payment to Stormy Daniels to enter into this non-disclosure agreement. The whole basis, it seems to me, the premise of this case was that Alvin Bragg was trying to show that that was actually a campaign finance
Yeah.
violation, and he entered into the ledger that these were legal fees because he was paying his attorney when in fact somehow there were campaign donations or can you clarify what really happened, and have you seen this kind of, I guess, case
Certainly. I
before?
mean, yeah, it's pretty convoluted, but as far as the hush money payments or this kind of agreement to keep things quiet, there's nothing wrong with that. That happens all the time. People have these settlements, these confidentiality agreements. They do it constantly, and it's not illegal. What the prosecution in this case said is the whole purpose in doing that was that it was a campaign. So ultimately, this was a campaign donation, and it should have been recorded on the books that way. Problem is some of this took place when Donald Trump wasn't a candidate, right? That's how I
Correct.
remember the evidence.
Yes, you're correct.
Well, that's a big problem because that's not connected to the campaign. So that's an appellate issue right there. And then it's just kind of unusual to bootstrap these misdemeanors into these felonies. I've never seen it take place before. I think it's a very unique issue. And so there's a variety of different issues, as we just talked about, for appeal. And I'm certain that Donald Trump will be exercising those appellate rights.
Well, let's say, okay, and I don't think it was, but let's say, hypothetically, this in fact, for the benefit of the argument here, that this was in fact a campaign donation, or it was an attempt to keep somebody quiet during a campaign season. You and I know a lot of politicians who have campaigned, and there's been a lot of dirt behind the scenes, and there was a strong effort to keep those things behind closed doors, to keep those things quiet during a campaign season. And I don't recall ever there being a case where, hey, you were trying to keep this information away from the voting public. That is a felony. Have you seen
Yeah,
that
so
before?
yeah, the case that I recall that has some similarity to this is John Edwards, who was a presidential candidate for the Democrats.
Mm-hmm.
He did have a hush money arrangement. It was kept secret. There was allegations that that was a campaign finance donation. He went to trial, and guess what? The jury acquitted him. They
Yes.
said, nonsense, right? Well, this is ridiculous. We're not going to find him guilty of this offense. And that's not how it took place here. So there is some precedent for a jury saying, I don't agree with this. They happen to agree in this particular case. I think that it's been well documented in the media that this jury pool didn't like Donald Trump as it was. But
Hmm.
nevertheless, I'm not here to criticize the jury. They did their duties, and never criticize the jury for that. But again, this still sets up a lot of appellate issues because Trump made a lot of objections. He made a lot of he raised these types of issues well in advance, and he preserved those objections. They essentially fell on deaf ears of this judge, and he's got a route then with the appellate courts to see if that will hold water.
And that's going to be interesting to follow that aspect of it, that line of this whole case here, to see how the
Yeah.
appellate courts deal with this. There is obviously a belief in this country, and certainly with the Donald Trump campaign, but I think it seems to me that more people are observing that there has been a weaponization, unfortunately, of the Department of Justice. And again, this is an institution that I respect overall in the history of the DOJ, and I know you do as well because you were
Yeah.
a U.S. attorney in the Southeastern District of Michigan, in Detroit, Michigan, and worked for Attorney General William Barr. But do you think there is a legitimate argument to say, yeah, this DOJ, at least this iteration of the Department of Justice, has been seemingly weaponized in order to favor a particular political party?
So before I was the U.S. attorney, I was an assistant U.S. attorney, right? So I was a line prosecutor kind of arguing the cases on the line in the Justice Department. So my perspective is there's a lot of great people in the Justice Department who are doing a good job. You know, those people who are the line FBI agents arresting the bank robbers, doing the human trafficking cases. But there is a problem at the top. And there, I think it's been well documented as well that we had certain people in the FBI who were treating Trump unfairly, and they were Peter Strzok and these types
Hmm.
of folks. They're acting improperly, and that's wrong. So I don't paint with a broad brush. I think some people say that the whole Justice Department is corrupt. We should defund it. No, I think it's like lawyers, right? Okay, there's lots of lawyers, and some of them are terrible, right?
Yeah,
So you're a journalist, Tom. I mean, you get
yeah,
that. There's lots
yes.
of really good journalists. There's some bad ones. And the Justice Department is such a large entity. That's true there also, right? So
Yeah.
that's the whole point. I think, you know, the what Trump should be doing is, and his team should be utilizing a scalpel, right, instead of a shotgun, to make
Hmm.
sure that we are following ethically and getting the correct people in these positions instead of wiping out everybody, who are civil servants doing the correct job. I don't think anybody wants to do that.
No, I think reform is needed at the top. As you said, the leadership needs to be changed, and it's about to be changed, obviously, because there's a new administration coming in starting on January 20th. But yeah, you're right. That's exactly how it is. And you mentioned journalists. There's a lot of bad ones, there's a lot of good ones out there, and you try not to do a broad brush. But when it seems that one side is overtaking or having a majority somehow, or at least the influence, that it needs to be called out and needs to be dealt with. One final question here. Judge Merchan here. Apparently, there's going to be no prison time. There's going to be no ramifications or consequences. In I guess effectively, essentially. I mean, there's the reputation aspect of it. You can now call him a convicted felon. Blah blah blah. But in terms of punishment, that's not going to be there. How do you square that with the narrative that we've heard for years by these very same people that Donald Trump is a danger to democracy, he's getting away, no one's above the law, and then all of a sudden they back off here and say, yeah, but we're not going to punish him.
Yeah, I actually mentioned this to my children recently because 2 days before the election, people were saying Donald Trump is Hitler. He's awful. He's going to kill democracy, and he is the Antichrist, basically.
Yeah.
2 days after the election, Joe Biden's meeting with him in the White House.
Mm-hmm.
And I said to my daughter, the president is meeting with Hitler in the White House. Can you believe it? Like, so it's, it's,
Yes.
why,
It's going to be
why
a
did we
peaceful
have,
transition to Hitler,
yeah,
that
right.
kind of
So
thing.
the point is, why did we have these accusations in the first place, right? If we knew that Joe Biden would have a peaceful transition of power with Donald Trump and they would sit down in the White House, and why are we then using this vitriolic language to attack each other? I firmly believe that just because you disagree with someone doesn't make that person evil, and
Mm-hmm.
that's where politics is nowadays. I have been subject to this myself, where I was involved in a number of cases where if you just happen to disagree with someone, then they think that you're an evil being. That's not the
Mm-hmm.
case.
All
And
right.
Donald Trump has different policies. You might not like those policies, but that doesn't mean that just because he wants to have a hard line against the communist government of China that he's xenophobic, right?
Exactly.
It just
Right.
doesn't add up.
No. And I think a big chunk of the American people realized that they've been kind of defrauded in that sense with the narrative, and they're a bit disillusioned now. And you brought up Joe Biden, and I'll just bring up Gretchen Whitmer because prior to this whole thing, but the election, she was very antagonistic towards Donald Trump, and after the election, says, "Yeah, I believe Donald Trump loves Michigan, and I look forward to working with him." And I thought, wow, that's a stark contrast to what you said
Amazing.
just a few days ago. So
Yeah,
you're right about
it's
that.
truly amazing.
I can't thank you enough. I really appreciate your work and love what you're doing there at Hahnemann and as a partner at Hahnemann. And of course, really respect your time with the Department of Justice as a U.S. Attorney for the Southeastern District of Michigan. Matthew Schneider, always good to talk with you, my friend. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tom. Thanks so much, and welcome to your show. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you as well. Yep, Matthew Schneider there, good guy. He really knows his stuff, and he is one of those very, very objective, former prosecutor now, an attorney, and he's always been an attorney. But as a prosecutor now, I think he's doing defense work for white collar crime and back and forth. But he knows his stuff, and he's very thorough, and he's been involved in a lot of cases and knows what he's talking about. So thanks to him for this. And listen, my view on this is like the timing of this absolutely exposes the motive. Scheduling Donald Trump's sentencing just 10 days before his inauguration, it's a political ploy. It's the same thing they've been doing for years with him. And it's not a pursuit of justice. If the law truly mattered here, the timeline wouldn't so conveniently align with maximizing public embarrassment before he assumes office. And it reeks of desperation to undermine his legitimacy. This is what they were doing in 2016 and 2017. He's not a legitimate president. He wasn't elected fairly. And they kept fighting his first term. And who knows if they'll continue that in the second term. I hope they do not. But this is not a good indicator of it. The conflicts of interest here, by the way, destroyed the credibility in this case. Judge Merchan's donations to Joe Biden's campaign and his daughter's connections to Democrat-affiliated firms just totally obliterate the notion of impartiality. He is an activist. He's a Democratic activist, the judge in this case. And the person that Democrats seem to hate the most is this guy sitting before him, Donald Trump. So justice does it not demand an unbiased arbiter, if you want to put it that way in this case? But this judge's actions scream partisanship. And to me, cast doubt on the entire process and tainting any verdict issued under his watch, not to mention the prosecutor in this case, Alvin Bragg. And then the unconditional discharge on this case. They're effectively admitting that the case is weak. The suggestion of an unconditional discharge for 34 felony convictions because he wrote legal fees when he paid his attorney in his book, or his team did. 34 felony convictions and unconditional discharge. These charges were political theater. They're effectively admitting that. And if Trump were as dangerous as they've been claiming, no judge would let him walk away without jail time or probation or fines or something. And I'm not lamenting the fact that he's not going to be punished because I don't think he's guilty of what they claim he is. But it's not justice anyway. It's a sham. And the selective prosecution in this case in the very beginning undermines the rule of law. Hunter Biden received a blanket pardon for a decade of alleged crimes. Anything you committed crime-wise in that decade for the past 10 years, you're scot-free. And those are serious crimes, serious allegations involving foreign enemies to the United States, who he and likely maybe his father were involved in. Donald Trump faces relentless prosecution for these tenuous accusations against him. And the blatant double standard here, it just reveals a justice system that has been weaponized against political opponents. And they shield their allies. And it's a practice that threatens democracy itself. That's the real threat right there. And then there's the immunity precedents that are being ignored for political gain. The denial of Donald Trump's motion, which Matthew Schneider said there, it rarely gets denied. A motion to delay the sentencing date is almost always granted. But this judge, who apparently hates Donald Trump, denied it. And when you factor in that, the Supreme Court, their immunity rulings, it's indefensible what he did here. And it signals that, foundational legal principles are disposable. When political adversaries need a win, and, it's eroding trust in the judiciary system, it destabilizes the rule of law, the prosecution's narrative has totally collapsed. For so many years, the Democrats and their media allies painted Donald Trump as an existential threat to democracy. And yet now they're arguing his crimes merit no punishment whatsoever. Yeah, just let him go. And it's not just hypocritical. It confirms the charges were never about justice, but about smearing his name to secure political advantage. The Democrats' aggressive legal strategy has backfired spectacularly. And I think it's galvanized Donald Trump's base, and it's increased his political capital. You look what's happening in the United States. You look what's happening in Canada right now with Justin Trudeau stepping down as the leader of his Liberal Party. He'll likely not be prime minister very soon here. And what's happening in Canada is the rise of a conservative leader who's basing his whole campaign on common sense. Care more about the people you're governing versus these very narrow special interest groups, which Justin Trudeau had been doing and Joe Biden had been doing. You look at countries like Germany and Italy and France and how the people, the citizens of those countries have been disillusioned to the point they're like, well, maybe we should try these conservatives because actually, when I think about it, they seem to align more with my principles than these far-left liberals do. I thought I was liberal, but maybe I'm not. If you really care about people, which liberals claim they do, and then you see what's happening to people, maybe the liberals aren't really what they claim to be. And maybe the conservatives, after all, they're the ones who actually don't believe in racism. They believe in individual civil rights and liberties. And they're starting to think about this, and I think wake up. They're the real woke. The real awakening is happening, thankfully, across the world. But there's enough people out there to do a lot of damage. And that includes this current Department of Justice and the judicial system in this country. It's become a political weapon. And this case just exemplifies, it's one of many cases that exemplify the corruption of justice into this tool of political warfare by ignoring conflicts of interest, bending the immunity precedents, rushing sentencing, and the prosecution has stripped the legal system of its credibility. It's a laughingstock in the eyes of many Americans. And public interest is a transparent excuse. That's what Judge Marchand was saying. In the interest of public interest, we're going to get this going here on January 10th, right before his inauguration. It's a ruse. It's not true. It's laughable. The public sees, I think, right through that claim by Judge Marchand. It's a charade. This is about branding Trump as a felon for partisan purposes, not about protecting or serving the people whatsoever. The fallout strengthens Donald Trump from these the weakening, those who want to weaken his name and his brand, and it was a sham trial, and it's really elevated him as kind of a martyr for political persecution. When you think about it, people are like, after he was the attempted assassination on his life, how many liberals came out and said, wow, something is amiss here. They just tried to kill him. I remember Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook. He's very much a liberal. But he looked at Donald Trump and said, wow, okay, that guy is bad blank. What I just saw him do there, stand up and pump his fist in the air as blood is dripping from his ear from a bullet after someone tried to kill him. Yeah, this guy is strong, and he cares, seemingly, about this country. So that's what's going on. All right, I want to get to some headlines here real quick, and we'll get to your comments in a moment. Vice President Kamala Harris, presiding as President of the Senate, faced a historic irony, certifying her own defeat.
The state of the vote for the President of the United States, as delivered to the President of the Senate, is as follows. The whole number of the electors appointed to vote for President of the United States is 538. Within that whole number, the majority is 270. The votes for President of the United States are as follows. Donald J. Trump of the state of Florida has received 312 votes. Kamala D. Harris Kamala D. Harris of the state of California has received 226 votes. The whole number of electors appointed to vote for Vice President of the United States is 538. Within that whole number, a majority is 270. The votes for Vice President of the United States are as follows. J.D. Vance of the state of Ohio has received 312 votes. Tim Walz of the state of Minnesota has received 226 votes. This announcement of the state of the vote by the President of the Senate shall be deemed a sufficient declaration of the persons elected, President and Vice President of the United States, each for a term beginning on the 20th day of January 2025, and shall be entered together with the list of the votes on the journals of the House and the Senate. Thank you very much.
All right, Kamala Harris there presiding over this session, the historic day. It was orderly as a session of Congress, thankfully, and Vice President Harris officially certifying Donald Trump's 2024 presidential election victory yesterday over her, solidifying his path to the Oval Office. 312 Electoral College votes for Donald Trump, 226 for Kamala Harris. And the process marked a stark contrast, obviously, to the turmoil of 4 years ago. There were riots, of course, at the Capitol. We all remember that, January 6th of 2021. It was a horrific day, and it should never have happened like that. But Joe Biden was certified that day as well. So Harris, by the way, there were a lot of threats from Democrats this time around that they weren't going to certify this election, that they were going to try to prevent Donald Trump from being certified because they called him an insurrectionist based on what happened 4 years ago. 4 years ago yesterday. And, that's what occurred back then. And they were trying to do it again today. But, for the good of the country, maybe I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt, or for political expedience, they all agreed, no, let's make sure we certify him because we don't want to be compared to those January 6th rioters from 4 years ago. So, okay, so that's what happened yesterday. Good. It went smoothly. It should have. That was wonderful. And, it was ironic in a sense, maybe awkward. I don't know if it was. Kamala Harris presiding over her own defeat, but she emphasizes the importance of the peaceful transfer of power. And she called it a sacred obligation in a video that was released ahead of the session. And the November election, saw Republicans sweeping the presidency and both houses of Congress. There was a new era in Washington, D.C., and an era, by the way, that will hopefully de-weaponize this government against anybody. You don't weaponize the tools of governance for political purposes. Inasmuch as the Democrats decry January 6th of 2021 as this insurrection, they are ignoring the attempted coups time and time again by the Democratic Party. First, by trying to get Donald Trump out of office in his first term, these various impeachments, total sham impeachment trials and whatnot, that he was not convicted of in the Senate, so he stayed in office. But there was a severe attempt to get him out based on making a phone call to Volodymyr Zelensky saying, hey, look into Joe Biden because he met with you guys. It looks like he scammed us all out of $1 billion, and it was a quid pro quo. That's what Donald Trump did, and he was impeached for that. And it was another case of projection. The Democrats impeached him because they said for quid pro quo, do this for that. Yeah, that's not what happened. That's what Joe Biden did. That's what Donald Trump wanted them to look into. So they reverse things, this constant projection. Anyway, in any case, what happened yesterday, it was a good thing. Donald Trump has been certified. He's on his way 13 days from now to be inaugurated as president. And the tellers for the vote count included bipartisan figures like Senators Deb Fischer, a Republican out of Nebraska, and Amy Klobuchar from Minnesota, a Democrat. I don't know if she's so bipartisan, but she was there. Okay, good for her. You had Representatives Brian Steele, Republican out of Wisconsin, and Joe Morell, a Democrat out of New York. Good, they're standing in solidarity on the fact that this was all on the up and everything was fine. It was noteworthy that the Republicans erupted in applause and they celebrated Donald Trump's electoral count there and J.D. Vance's electoral count as well, while Kamala Harris was up there. And she was, for all intents and purposes, she was fine up there. Heavy snowstorm, by the way, in D.C., but the atmosphere inside the Capitol is very calm, even celebratory for many Republicans. Speaker Mike Johnson called the session to order, while Trump declared the certification a big moment in history on Truth Social. So just a few weeks away, Donald Trump will take the oath of office January 20th, ushering in his second term just 10 days after he is sentenced in that sham trial that somehow he is guilty of 34 felonies. That will go to appeal, and I think, as Matthew Schneider does, that it will likely succeed on appeal. Okay, we got some comments and some questions. I would love to take them right now. Let's bring them up one by one. Adam is watching that. The engineer, hey, good to see you, the engineer. Happy New Year to you. The old Russian saying, show me the man and I'll show you the crime. That's exactly what they did in this and other cases. Those two in New York, this one being one of them with Alvin Bragg, and the other one with Letitia James. They campaigned on bringing down Donald Trump. They were going to try to find something on him, and both those cases, they found something that was so commonplace in New York and around this country that suddenly became a criminal act because Donald Trump did the same thing. And the Letitia James case was the fact that he was dealing with his real estate properties and the way he valued them to the banks. And the banks did their own evaluation. They agreed with Donald Trump's evaluation. Nobody was harmed in this. And Letitia James says, maybe I can twist this to file a civil suit against him. And she wins because it's in New York, very blue state that also hates Donald Trump as in recent years. They used to love him in New York, but then he ran for office and they hated him. So this happens time and time again, searching for a crime because they were looking at the man and they wanted to take him down. Great recollection on that quote, the engineer. Thanks so much. Let's bring up another comment here. This is from Walter P. Duro is back. Imagine being a fly on the wall during plotting by government and business interests vis-a-vis corporate welfare, socialist central planning, dirt on number 375 project, Riverfront Conservancy, train station, court down, zones, districts, corridors. You're right about all this. I absolutely agree with you, Walter Duro. You can look at all these organizations that on the surface are projecting themselves to be so necessary, so good for the people. And then you look who's getting rich by those various, corporate and government partnerships and the subsidies that have gone into this and the millions of dollars. You brought up the Riverfront Conservancy. I think it was $40 million, I think, were stolen by the guy in charge after years of funding for that. And so anyway, that's in the train station depot. That's an interesting case as well. Yep. Thanks, Walter. That's a good comment. I appreciate that very much. All right, one more here. Let's bring up one more, then we'll say so long. Hey, it's Harry Sakalian. Hi, Harry. Hi, Tom. On the topic of weaponizing our justice system, I just need a headline in one of the Detroit newspapers that Dana Nessel vows to protect Michigan residents if Trump tries to infringe on their rights. Now, there's a comforting thought for Michigan residents. Regards, Harry Sakalian. Harry, thank you so much. Regards to you. So this whole idea that the Attorney General of Dana Nessel, who actively goes after political opponents and those who are conservatives, weaponizing, talk about a weaponization of the judicial system. It's happening in the state of Michigan. The George Soros-funded Attorney General Dana Nessel, very active politically, is supposed to be an objective, purveyor of our justice system in the state, and actively, based on evidence I've seen, protects her allies from any harm, and then goes after her political opponents. She's saying that she's going to protect Michigan citizens from Donald Trump. How are you going to do that? What's he going to do to the citizens in the state? I'm curious what she means by that. I think what she's saying is that Donald Trump might try to deport illegal immigrants. Is that part of it? Those aren't citizens of the state. They're here illegally. And all your efforts, Dana Nessel and Jocelyn Benson's efforts and Gretchen Whitmer's efforts to make them legal, to give them legal status, even though they came across illegally, or Joe Biden somehow let them in and said, hey, we're going to call them legal, even though they're not supposed to be here. That does not make a legal citizen. So I think she might be referring to that. She might be referring to abortion or one of these other issues, maybe LGBTQ, not allowing a drag queen in every school in the state. I don't know. But I don't think, listen, Dana Nessel, your pal, Governor Gretchen Whitmer, after the election said, hey, I believe Donald Trump loves Michigan. So maybe you should let that seep in as well. Talk to Gretchen, and you guys get on the same page in terms of your narrative. And maybe you come back around and say, actually, yeah, Donald Trump does love Michigan. That's what I was told to say this time around by the Democratic Party. Just saying, that might have been how she comes to her conclusions. I don't know. I'm just saying. Thanks for your comments. It's always great to hear from you and to have you be a part of the program. I want to thank our guest today, Matthew Schneider. Great insight as well on this case with Juan Merchan, the judge in New York, and the case brought by the New York prosecutor, Manhattan prosecutor, Alvin Bragg. So the jury, they'll come down on the sentencing on January 10th, 3 days from now. And that's 10 days prior to the inauguration of President-elect Donald J. Trump. Remember, share the content, share the program. We're on X, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. You can go to TomJordanLive.com to learn more about what we are doing here. Please share our content. Thanks so much. Appreciate it. God bless you. We'll see you back here tomorrow.